There is a town called Hartwell, nestled in the soft hills of Virginia, where the autumn leaves turn shades of amber and rose each year without fail, and where the evening light seems to linger just a little longer than it does in other places. It is the kind of town where front porches hold rocking chairs that have been passed down through generations, where the local bakery opens its doors at 5 in the morning and fills the streets with the gentle scent of cinnamon and warm bread, and where neighbors still wave to one another as they collect their morning papers from dew-covered lawns. In a small cottage at the end of Magnolia Lane, there lived a woman named Rosemary Whitfield, though everyone in town simply called her Rose. She was 34 years old, with kind eyes the color of chestnuts and hands that always seemed to be busy with some gentle task or another. Rose worked as a seamstress from her home, a craft she had learned from her grandmother many years ago, and her little cottage was always filled with bolts of fabric in soft colors, spools of thread arranged like tiny rainbows on wooden shelves, and the quiet hum of her sewing machine as it stitched together the dreams of brides and the hopes of mothers preparing for their children's special occasions. The cottage itself was modest but warm, with walls painted the palest shade of buttercream and windows dressed in lace curtains that Rose had made herself. A small garden wrapped around the front, filled with lavender and sage and roses that bloomed in shades of pink and cream each summer. Inside, the furniture was simple but comfortable, most of it second-hand pieces that Rose had restored with patient hands and furniture wax that smelled of beeswax and lemon. There was a reading nook by the bay window where afternoon sunlight pooled like honey, and a small kitchen where copper pots hung from hooks and dried herbs dangled from the ceiling in fragrant bundles. Rose had always been the quieter of the two Whitfield sisters. Her younger sister, Vivian, had been born 4 years after Rose, arriving in the world with a cry that seemed to announce she intended to be noticed. Where Rose was contemplative and gentle, Vivian was vibrant and commanding. Where Rose found joy in quiet moments and simple pleasures, Vivian seemed to crave the spotlight, the admiration of others, the constant reassurance that she was exceptional and beloved. Their mother, Eleanor, had passed away when the girls were young, leaving their father, Thomas, to raise them alone. Thomas Whitfield had been a carpenter, a man of few words but deep feeling, who expressed his love through the things he built with his hands. He had made Rose her first sewing table when she was 12, and he had built Vivian a vanity with a heart-shaped mirror when she turned 16. He treated both daughters with equal tenderness, though he often seemed more at ease with Rose, whose quiet nature matched his own. When Thomas passed away, 3 years ago, the sisters had inherited the small family home equally, along with a modest sum from their father's life insurance and savings. Rose had used her portion to purchase her cottage on Magnolia Lane, while Vivian had moved to the city, to a sleek apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked as though it belonged in a magazine. The sisters had grown apart over the years, not through any dramatic falling out, but through the slow drift that sometimes happens when two people are walking different paths. Vivian called occasionally, usually to share news of her latest accomplishment, or to ask Rose's opinion on something she had already decided. Rose always listened with patience, offering gentle words of support, even when she sensed that Vivian was not truly seeking her counsel, but rather her validation. It was on a particularly golden October afternoon, when the trees along Magnolia Lane were dressed in their finest autumn colors, and the air carried the sweet smoke of someone's distant bonfire, that Rose received the call that would set this story in motion. She was sitting in her reading nook, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands, watching the way the sunlight made the dust motes dance like tiny fairies in the air, when her phone rang with her sister's name on the screen. "Rose," Vivian said, her voice carrying that particular blend of excitement and self-importance that Rose had come to recognize so well over the years. "I have the most wonderful news. Richard proposed last night. We're getting married." Rose felt a genuine warmth spread through her chest at the news. Despite the distance that had grown between them, she still loved her sister, still remembered the little girl who had once crawled into her bed during thunderstorms, who had once looked up at her with wide eyes and asked Rose to teach her how to braid her hair. "Oh, Vivian," Rose said, and her voice was soft with sincerity. "That's beautiful news. I'm so happy for you." "It was absolutely perfect," Vivian continued, and Rose could hear the rustle of movement, could imagine her sister pacing her apartment in her silk robe, perhaps admiring the ring on her finger as she spoke. "He took me to that restaurant on the harbor, the one with the private dining rooms, and there were roses everywhere, and a string quartet, and the ring is stunning. Rose, absolutely stunning. 3 carats. princess cut. Rose smiled and took a sip of her tea, letting her sister's words wash over her like a familiar tide. She made sounds of appreciation at the appropriate moments, asked gentle questions about Richard and the proposal, and felt a quiet contentment in her sister's happiness, even as she recognized that Vivian's joy seemed to orbit around the external trappings rather than the deeper meaning of commitment and partnership. "I want you to make my dress," Vivian said suddenly, and Rose felt her heart lift with surprise and genuine pleasure. No one else. "Rose, you're the best seamstress I know, and I want something completely original, something that will make everyone in that church gasp when they see me walk down the aisle." "I would be honored," Rose said, and she meant it with her whole heart. The thought of creating something beautiful for her sister's wedding day, of being part of such an important moment, filled her with a warm sense of purpose. "We'll need to meet soon to discuss designs and fabrics. When were you thinking for the wedding?" "June," Vivian said. "June 15th. I want roses everywhere, and the ceremony will be at St. Catherine's and the reception at the Willowbrook estate. Richard's family has connections there." Rose nodded to herself, already beginning to envision the kind of gown that would suit her sister, the fabric she might use, the delicate lacework that could cascade like a waterfall down a chapel train. "That sounds lovely, Vivian. I can start sketching some ideas and send them to you." "Perfect," Vivian said, and then, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and Rose, I need you to do something else for me. I need you to stay in the background at the wedding. You understand, don't you? This is my day, and I need all the attention on me. I can't have you there looking all, you know." Rose felt a small chill move through her, a familiar sensation she had experienced many times throughout her life when her sister's words carried an edge she could not quite name. "Looking all what, Vivian?" There was a pause, and then Vivian laughed, a sound that did not quite reach its usual brightness. "Oh, you know what I mean. You're always so simple, so plain, and people always seem to notice you for some reason. They find you interesting, even though you never do anything interesting. I just need this day to be about me, Rose. You can come to the ceremony, of course, but maybe sit toward the back, and at the reception, just try to blend in. Don't talk to too many people. Don't draw attention." Rose held the phone against her ear and looked out at her garden, at the late afternoon light that was beginning to take on the soft golden quality that preceded sunset. She felt something complicated moving through her, a mixture of hurt and understanding, of disappointment and a strange, tired acceptance. She had spent so many years interpreting her sister's behavior through the lens of compassion, seeing Vivian's insecurities rather than her cruelties, making excuses for words that cut even when they were wrapped in laughter. "I understand," Rose said quietly, because she did understand, even if the understanding brought with it a subtle ache. "I'll make you a beautiful dress, Vivian, and I'll do my best to stay out of the way." "You're the best, Rose. I knew you'd understand. I'll send you my measurements and some pictures of styles I like. This is going to be the most perfect wedding anyone has ever seen." After they said their goodbyes and Rose set down her phone, she sat, for a long while in the fading light, her tea growing cold in her hands. The cottage was quiet around her, filled with the peaceful sounds of settling wood and the distant song of evening birds. She thought about her sister, about the little girl who had once held her hand on the first day of school, and she wondered when exactly Vivian had begun to see her not as a sister to cherish, but as a shadow to diminish. But Rose was not a woman who dwelt in bitterness. She had learned long ago that carrying resentment was like holding a stone in your pocket, growing heavier with each passing day. So she finished her tea, washed her cup in the little kitchen sink, and went to her sewing room to begin sketching ideas for her sister's wedding gown. Whatever Vivian's faults, whatever careless words she spoke, Rose would pour her love into this creation. She would make something beautiful, something that would make her sister glow on her wedding day, and that would be enough. The weeks that followed were filled with a gentle rhythm of work and quiet living. Rose spent her mornings tending to her regular clients, hemming trousers and taking in dresses and creating christening gowns for the babies of Hartwell. In the afternoons, she worked on Vivian's dress, each stitch placed with care and intention, each bead and sequin attached with steady hands and a patient heart. Vivian called occasionally to check on the progress, her voice always carrying that note of anxious excitement that brides so often possess in the months before their weddings. She sent photographs of herself from various angles, along with detailed instructions about what she wanted emphasized and what she wanted concealed. She sent fabric swatches she had found in city boutiques, most of them too stiff or too shiny for the effect she claimed to want, and Rose gently redirected her toward softer materials, toward silks that would flow like water, and laces that would catch the light like captured moonbeams. In quiet moments, Rose sometimes allowed herself to imagine the wedding day, to picture the church filled with flowers and the soft glow of afternoon light through stained glass windows. She imagined watching her sister walk down the aisle, radiant in the gown Rose had created, and she felt a preemptive swell of pride and love. She tried not to think too much about Vivian's request that she stay in the background, tried not to let those words settle too deeply in her heart. Vivian was under stress, Rose told herself. Weddings brought out strange behaviors in people. Surely her sister did not truly see her as an embarrassment to be hidden away. The autumn deepened around Rose's cottage, the leaves falling in gentle drifts to carpet the ground in shades of rust and gold. She raked them into piles and added them to her compost bin, where they would break down over winter and become rich soil for next year's garden. She baked apple crisps and pumpkin bread, sharing them with her neighbors, and saving portions for the elderly Mrs. Patterson down the lane, who lived alone and always welcomed company. On weekends, Rose visited the town's small library, where she would sit by the fireplace and read novels about gentle romances and quiet adventures. The librarian, a woman named Clara who had known Rose since childhood, would sometimes join her for tea during slow hours, and they would talk about books and gardens and the small happenings of Hartwell that made up the fabric of their lives. "How is your sister's dress coming along?" Clara asked one gray November afternoon when rain was pattering softly against the library windows and the fire crackled with particular warmth. Rose smiled, cupping her hands around her teacup. "It's coming beautifully, I think. The bodice is nearly finished, and I've started on the skirt. 50 yards of silk organza, layer upon layer. It's going to be quite something." Clara nodded, her silver-streaked hair catching the firelight. "You've always had a gift, Rose. I remember when you made that dress for the mayor's daughter's debutante ball. People talked about it for months." "That was a lovely project," Rose agreed. "Though I think this one will be even more special. Creating something for family, you know. It carries a different kind of meaning." Clara studied her friend with knowing eyes. "And how are things with Vivian? Beyond the dress, I mean." Rose was quiet for a moment, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "She's very focused on the wedding," she said finally. "Very busy with all the planning. I'm sure we'll have more time to connect after everything settles down." Clara reached over and patted Rose's hand with gentle understanding. She had known the Whitfield sisters since they were children, had watched them grow into such different women, and she understood what Rose was not saying far better than Rose might have realized. But she also knew that Rose would find her own way through whatever difficulties lay ahead, because that was the kind of person Rose was, quiet and resilient, bending in the wind but never breaking. December came to Hartwell with a soft snowfall that transformed the town into a scene from a Christmas card. Rose decorated her cottage with evergreen boughs and cinnamon-scented pine cones, hung a wreath on her door that she had made herself from dried flowers and ribbons, and placed candles in her windows that glowed warmly through the winter nights. She continued to work on Vivian's dress, the project growing more elaborate and beautiful with each passing week. The bodice was a masterwork of hand-sewn pearls and delicate lace, fitted to Vivian's measurements with precision and care. The skirt had begun to take shape, layer upon gossamer layer, each one slightly longer than the last to create a cascading effect that would move like a cloud when Vivian walked. On Christmas Eve, Rose received a video call from Vivian, who appeared on screen in what looked like an expensive ski lodge, her cheeks flushed from the cold and her hair perfectly arranged beneath a cashmere hat. Richard was visible in the background, a tall man with sandy hair and the kind of confident smile that came from a life of easy privilege. "Merry Christmas, Rose," Vivian said, holding up a glass of champagne. "How's the dress coming?" "Merry Christmas," Rose replied, smiling at her sister's obvious happiness. "The dress is coming along wonderfully. I think you're going to love it." "I'd better," Vivian said with a laugh. "It's the most important dress of my life." "Oh, before I forget, I need to talk to you about the wedding party. I've decided on my bridesmaids, and I've realized there really isn't room for you in the formal party. The numbers are uneven as it is, and you're making the dress anyway, so you'll be busy with last-minute alterations and such. You understand." Rose felt the familiar small ache, the tiny contraction of her heart that she had come to associate with her sister's casual dismissals. "Of course," she said softly. "Whatever works best for the ceremony." "You're such a good sport, Rose. I knew you'd understand. Oh, Richard's calling me. We're going out for dinner. Talk soon." The screen went dark, and Rose sat in her quiet cottage, surrounded by the warm glow of Christmas candles and the gentle scent of the pine boughs she had arranged on her mantel. She thought about what it meant to be excluded from her own sister's wedding party, to be asked to make the dress, but not to stand beside the bride. She thought about all the small moments over the years when Vivian had pushed her to the margins, had treated her not as a sister to be celebrated, but as a problem to be managed. And yet, even as these thoughts moved through her, Rose also felt something else, something that might have been the first stirrings of a gentle understanding that would grow stronger in the months to come. She understood that her worth was not determined by her sister's perceptions, that her value was not diminished by another person's inability to see it. She was a woman who created beautiful things with her hands, who nurtured a garden and friendships and a life that was quietly rich with meaning. Vivian's blindness to these qualities reflected something about Vivian, not about Rose. She went to bed that Christmas Eve with a heart that was tender but not broken, and she slept deeply beneath her warm quilts while snow continued to fall softly on Hartwell, covering everything in a blanket of peaceful white. The winter months passed with their own gentle rhythm, the short days and long nights creating a natural time for introspection and careful work. Rose spent hours each day on the wedding dress, taking breaks to stretch and rest her eyes, to walk through her snow-covered garden and breathe the clean, cold air, to prepare simple, nourishing meals that she ate by candlelight, while reading books that transported her to distant times and places. She spoke with Vivian every few weeks, conversations that were always dominated by wedding details and rarely touched on anything more personal. Rose learned about the flower arrangements and the menu and the guest list, about the drama of the seating chart and the difficulty of finding the right band. She listened and offered gentle opinions when asked, and she kept working on the dress, pouring her love and skill into every stitch. In February, something unexpected happened that would prove to be the first gentle turn in the story's quiet path toward healing. Rose received a letter in the mail, an actual paper letter in a cream-colored envelope addressed in elegant handwriting. The return address was a law firm in Richmond, one that Rose did not recognize. The envelope had arrived with the rest of her mail, tucked between a seed catalog and an electricity bill, and Rose had almost set it aside to deal with later before something about the paper quality caught her attention. It was heavy stationery, the kind that spoke of tradition and care, and the handwriting of the address was practiced and beautiful, each letter formed with deliberate precision. She carried the envelope to her reading nook, where the winter afternoon light was pale and soft through her lace curtains. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, the flakes drifting down silently and settling on the bare branches of her rose bushes like tiny blessings. The cottage was quiet except for the gentle hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of settling wood. Rose turned the envelope over in her hands, noting the embossed return address of the law firm, feeling the weight of the contents within. There was something about this moment that felt significant, though she could not have explained why. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as she slid her finger beneath the flap and withdrew the folded papers inside. As she read, her hands began to tremble slightly, not with fear, but with a complex mixture of surprise and confusion, and something that might have been the first stirrings of wonder. The letter informed Rose that her great-aunt Marguerite, her grandmother's sister who had moved to France decades ago and whom Rose had never met, had passed away at the age of 93. More significantly, the letter explained that Marguerite had left her entire estate to Rose and Rose alone, specifically naming her as the sole beneficiary in a will that had been carefully prepared and witnessed in accordance with both French and American law. The estate, the letter continued, included a small chateau in the Loire Valley, a collection of antique furniture and artwork, and a substantial sum of money that made Rose's head spin when she saw the figures. The letter also mentioned that Marguerite had left a series of personal letters for Rose, explaining her reasons for this bequest, and that these letters would be forwarded once the estate's legal matters were settled. Rose read the letter 3 times before setting it down on her lap and staring out at her winter garden, where the bare branches of her rose bushes reached toward the gray sky like gentle fingers. She did not understand why a great aunt she had never known would leave her such a gift. She did not understand why Vivian, who was equally related to Marguerite, had been excluded from the inheritance. She did not even know what she would do with a chateau in France, or a sum of money that exceeded anything she had ever imagined possessing. But as she sat there in the quiet of her cottage, she felt something shifting inside her, a gentle reorganization of possibilities, a sense that the universe might be arranging things in ways she could not yet comprehend. She decided to keep this news to herself for now, at least until she understood more about what it meant and why it had happened. There would be time enough to tell Vivian after the wedding, after the dress was finished and the ceremony completed and the immediate intensity of bridal focus had faded. Rose folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer of her grandmother's writing desk, the same desk where her grandmother had once written letters to her sister Marguerite, letters that had crossed an ocean and maintained a connection that Rose had never known existed. Then she returned to her sewing room and continued working on Vivian's dress, her steady hands moving the needle through silk and lace while her mind wandered through gardens she had never seen and rooms she could not yet imagine. Spring came slowly to Hartwell that year, the snow melting gradually to reveal the first green shoots of crocuses and daffodils pushing up through the thawing earth. Rose's garden began to wake from its winter sleep, and she spent pleasant hours preparing the beds and planning what she would plant once the danger of frost had passed. The wedding dress was nearly complete now, a breathtaking creation that hung on a special form in Rose's sewing room, catching the light and seeming almost to glow with its own inner radiance. Rose had outdone herself, everyone agreed, everyone being the few friends and neighbors she had shown it to in quiet moments. The dress was a masterpiece of craftsmanship and love, every bead placed with intention, every seam invisible, the whole effect one of ethereal beauty that would make any bride look like she had stepped out of a dream. More letters had arrived from the law firm, including the personal letters from Great-Aunt Marguerite that had been promised. Rose read them in the evenings, sitting in her reading nook with a cup of tea, and slowly the story of her unknown relative began to unfold. Marguerite had been a remarkable woman, it turned out. She had left Virginia as a young woman in the 1950s, traveling to France to study art, and falling in love with both the country and a French painter named Henri. She had lived a rich and creative life in the Loire Valley, painting and gardening, and hosting salons for artists and writers and dreamers. She had never had children of her own, but she had kept careful track of her family back in America, receiving regular letters from her sister, Rose's grandmother, until that sister's death. In her letters to Rose, Marguerite explained that she had always felt a special connection to Rose, even though they had never met. Rose's grandmother had written about her frequently, describing Rose's gentle nature, her artistic gifts, her quiet strength. Marguerite had recognized something of herself in these descriptions, and as she grew older and began to consider the distribution of her estate, she had known without doubt that Rose was the one who would appreciate and honor the things she was leaving behind. "I have watched from afar as you have lived with grace and kindness," Marguerite wrote in one letter, her handwriting elegant despite the slight tremor of age. "I have seen how you create beauty with your hands and how you tend to those around you with a gentle heart. My home, my garden, my life's work, they will be safe with you. They will continue to grow and blossom under your care." There was one other element to Marguerite's letters that moved Rose deeply. Marguerite had also been the quieter sister, she explained, the one who had often been overlooked in favor of her more vivacious sibling. She understood what it was to be diminished by someone who should have celebrated you, and she understood the particular kind of patience and strength it required to maintain your sense of self in the face of such treatment. "Do not let anyone make you small, my dear Rose," Marguerite wrote. "You are exactly as you should be, and your worth is not dependent on another's recognition of it. But also know that sometimes the universe finds its own ways of bringing truth to light. Trust in the unfolding of things. Trust in yourself." Rose kept these letters in her grandmother's writing desk alongside the original notification from the lawyers. She thought about them often as she completed the final details of Vivian's wedding dress, as she hand-stitched the tiny pearls along the neckline and created the delicate buttons that would run down the back. She thought about what it meant to be seen by someone you had never met, to be valued by a stranger who understood you perhaps better than the family you had known all your life. April arrived with its characteristic mix of warm days and cool nights, its showers and its flowers, its sense of renewal and possibility. The wedding was now only 2 months away, and Vivian's calls had become more frequent and more frantic, filled with last-minute changes and anxious questions and the particular intensity that descends upon brides as their day approaches. Rose had arranged to deliver the dress in person, making the trip to the city where Vivian lived so that she could do the final fitting and make any necessary adjustments. She packed the dress carefully in a special garment bag, surrounded by tissue paper and protective layers, and she drove the 3 hours to Vivian's apartment with the radio playing soft classical music and the spring countryside rolling past her windows. Vivian's apartment building was as impressive as Rose had imagined, all glass and steel and security guards in the lobby. Rose rode the elevator to the 15th floor, the dress bag draped carefully over her arm, and she felt both nervous and peaceful as she approached her sister's door, a curious combination that seemed to define so many of her feelings about Vivian. The fitting went well, technically speaking. The dress fit Vivian perfectly, accentuating her figure in all the ways she had requested, the colors and textures combining to create exactly the ethereal effect Rose had envisioned. Vivian looked beautiful in it, truly beautiful, and Rose felt a genuine surge of pride in her work and love for her sister as she watched Vivian turn before the full-length mirror. But Vivian's reaction was complicated, as so many of her reactions tended to be. She praised the dress effusively while simultaneously pointing out tiny imperfections that only she could see. She marveled at the craftsmanship while questioning whether certain elements were quite right. She thanked Rose repeatedly while also reminding her of her place in the wedding hierarchy. "You've done such a good job," Vivian said, still looking at herself in the mirror. "I mean, for a small-town seamstress. Obviously, I could have gone to a designer, but there's something charming about having my sister make it. It's like a rustic touch. People will find it quaint." Rose absorbed these words with the same quiet grace she had absorbed so many similar comments over the years. She made notes on the small adjustments Vivian requested, adjustments that were largely unnecessary but would give Vivian the satisfaction of having directed the process. She packed up the dress carefully and prepared to take it back to Hartwell for the final work. Before she left, Vivian handed her an envelope. "Here's your invitation," she said. "I've put you at table 17. It's toward the back, near the service entrance, but I'm sure you won't mind. And remember, Rose, please try to dress appropriately. Something simple and dark. You don't want to draw attention away from the bride." Rose took the envelope and looked at her sister, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw not the polished, confident woman before her, but the little girl who had once been afraid of thunder, who had once cried when a boy at school called her name ugly, who had once crawled into Rose's bed and whispered that she was scared she wasn't special enough for anyone to love her. "I'll see you at the wedding, Vivian," Rose said softly. "And you're going to be a beautiful bride." She drove home as the sun set over the spring countryside, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold and violet. She thought about her sister and her great-aunt and herself, about the complex weaving of family and love and disappointment and hope that made up a life. She thought about the wedding that was coming and the inheritance that waited and the choices that lay ahead. And somewhere in the quiet of that drive, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rose began to feel the stirrings of something new within herself. It was not anger or resentment or even sadness. It was something more like clarity, a gentle but firm understanding that the time was coming when certain truths would need to be spoken, certain patterns would need to be broken, certain recognitions would need to be made. But not yet. First, there was a dress to finish and a wedding to attend. The rest would unfold in its own time, as all things eventually do. The final weeks before the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Rose completed the dress, making the minor adjustments Vivian had requested and adding a few secret touches of her own. Tiny embroidered roses hidden in the hem and along the inside of the bodice, invisible to anyone but the wearer. A silent blessing from sister to sister. She tended her garden as spring reached its fullest bloom, the roses beginning to bud on bushes that would be covered in flowers by midsummer. She visited with Clara at the library and shared tea with Mrs. Patterson and continued to read the letters from Marguerite, each one revealing new layers of her great-aunt's remarkable life. She also began, tentatively, to communicate with the lawyers handling Marguerite's estate. There were documents to sign and decisions to make, and Rose approached each one with careful consideration. The chateau in France was being maintained by a caretaker who had worked for Marguerite for decades, and Rose arranged for this arrangement to continue while she determined what she wanted to do with the property. The artwork and antiques were being cataloged by experts, and Rose asked that photographs be sent to her so she could begin to understand what she had inherited. She told no one about the inheritance, keeping the secret close to her heart like a hidden garden. Part of her hesitation was practical, knowing that such news would complicate the wedding and Vivian's focus on her special day. But part of it was something else, something she could not quite name, a sense that this gift from Marguerite was meant to be revealed at the right moment, and that moment had not yet arrived. June came to Hartwell with its long days and warm nights, its fireflies and its roses, its sense of summer abundance. The 14th arrived, the day before the wedding, and Rose carefully packed the finished dress into her car, along with her own simple outfit for the ceremony, a soft gray dress that she had made herself and that she hoped was plain enough to satisfy her sister's requirements. The morning of June 14th dawned soft and golden, the kind of early summer day that feels like a gift from the universe. Rose woke before her alarm, lying in her familiar bed and listening to the bird song that filled her garden, the gentle chorus of wrens and finches, and the occasional melodious call of a mourning dove. She lay there for a while, feeling the weight of what the coming days would hold, and she breathed slowly and deliberately, grounding herself in the present moment before stepping into the whirlwind ahead. She had prepared everything carefully, laying out her gray dress the night before, packing a small overnight bag with a few things she would need for her stay in the city. The wedding dress hung in her sewing room, swathed in protective covering, its beauty hidden but somehow still radiating outward like a secret waiting to be revealed. Rose ate a simple breakfast of toast and tea, sitting at her kitchen table and watching the morning light move across the garden, and she felt a curious calm that she had not expected, a settled feeling in her chest that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her conscious mind. She loaded the dress into her car with exquisite care, laying it flat across the back seat and tucking the train gently to prevent any creasing. The drive to the city felt different this time, charged with significance in a way that her previous trips had not been. She noticed the countryside more acutely, the way the fields stretched green and golden toward the horizon, the way the old barns and farmhouses seemed to hold generations of stories in their weathered walls. She noticed the sky, vast and blue and scattered with cotton-soft clouds that drifted lazily eastward on the summer breeze. When she reached the city limits, the landscape changed to suburbs and then to urban density, the open spaces giving way to neighborhoods and shopping centers, and finally to the towering buildings of the downtown core. Rose navigated through streets that were familiar from her previous visits, making her way toward the Willowbrook estate on the outskirts of the city where Vivian had chosen to hold her celebration. She drove to the city once more, this time to deliver the dress to the venue where the ceremony would take place. The Willowbrook estate was as grand as Vivian had described, a sprawling property with manicured gardens and a historic manor house that had been converted into an event space. Rose drove up the long gravel drive, past gardens bursting with summer flowers, and delivered the dress to the bridal suite where Vivian would prepare the next day. Vivian was there, surrounded by bridesmaids and makeup artists and hairstylists, the chaos of wedding preparation in full swing. She barely looked up when Rose arrived, offering only a distracted wave and a reminder to hang the dress carefully and to be at the church by 1 o'clock the next day. Rose hung the dress in the closet designated for it, smoothing the fabric one last time and silently wishing it well on its journey. Then she slipped away from the bustle of the bridal suite and drove to the small hotel where she had booked a room for the night. The hotel was quiet and comfortable, a modest establishment on the outskirts of the city with clean rooms and friendly staff. Rose had dinner in the small restaurant on the ground floor, a simple meal of grilled fish and vegetables, and she went to bed early, wanting to be rested for whatever the next day might bring. She slept deeply that night, her dreams filled with images of gardens and chateaux and letters written in elegant script. She dreamed of her grandmother and her great-aunt, of women she had known and women she had never met, all of them connected by invisible threads that stretched across oceans and through time. She dreamed of roses blooming in every color, their fragrance filling the air with sweetness and hope. And when she woke on the morning of June 15th, she felt a calm certainty that had been building for months, a quiet knowing that this day would hold more than anyone expected, that truths would emerge like flowers opening to the sun, and that whatever happened, she would face it with the grace and strength that had carried her through all the days of her life. She dressed carefully in her gray dress, applied light makeup, and arranged her chestnut hair in a simple twist at the back of her neck. She looked at herself in the hotel room mirror and saw a woman who was not flashy or commanding, but who possessed her own quiet beauty, the kind that came from years of living with kindness and creating with love. Then Rose gathered her purse and made her way to the church where her sister was about to be married, not knowing that this day would change everything, not in dramatic or frightening ways, but in the gentle, healing manner that true transformation often takes. St. Catherine's Church stood at the center of a small town square, its stone walls covered with ivy and its stained glass windows glowing with centuries of filtered light. Rose arrived early, as she always did, and found a seat near the back, as her sister had requested. The church was already beginning to fill with guests, elegantly dressed people who spoke in hushed tones and admired the flower arrangements that cascaded from every available surface. The flowers were beautiful, Rose noticed, great sprays of roses in shades of blush and cream, interspersed with peonies and ranunculus and delicate sprigs of baby's breath. The scent filled the church with a sweetness that was almost overwhelming, and Rose breathed it in slowly, letting it settle into her memory alongside all the other sensory details of this significant day. She recognized almost no one among the gathered guests. Richard's family dominated the crowd, wealthy-looking people in expensive clothes who greeted each other with the easy familiarity of a close-knit social circle. Rose caught a few curious glances in her direction, likely wondering who this simply dressed woman in the back might be, but no one approached her, and she was content to sit quietly and observe. The ceremony began precisely at 2 o'clock, as the string quartet shifted from their prelude pieces to the traditional processional music. The bridesmaids came first, 4 young women in matching lavender gowns who walked with practiced elegance down the center aisle. Then came the flower girl, a tiny niece of Richard's who scattered rose petals with enthusiastic abandon. And finally, the music swelled, everyone rose to their feet, and Vivian appeared at the entrance of the church. Rose felt her breath catch as she watched her sister begin the walk down the aisle. The dress was even more beautiful than she had remembered, catching the light from the stained glass windows and seeming to glow with its own inner radiance. Vivian moved with conscious grace, aware of every eye upon her, and she was, in that moment, truly stunning. But Rose also noticed something else, something that probably only a sister would see. Beneath the carefully applied makeup and the radiant smile, Vivian looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes that powder could not quite conceal, and a tightness around her mouth that spoke of stress held barely at bay. The months of wedding planning had taken their toll, and beneath the bridal perfection, Rose glimpsed the exhausted woman underneath. The ceremony proceeded according to the traditional format, the exchange of vows and rings, the readings from Scripture, the gentle homily from the minister about the nature of love and commitment. Rose listened with half her attention, the other half wandering through memories and reflections, through all the moments that had led to this particular afternoon in this particular church. She thought about the little sister who had once adored her, who had followed her around the house and copied her drawings and begged to wear her clothes. She thought about the gradual shift that had occurred as they grew, the way Vivian had begun to see Rose not as a role model, but as competition, not as an ally, but as a threat to be neutralized. She thought about all the small cruelties over the years, the offhand comments and deliberate exclusions, the way Vivian had systematically worked to diminish Rose in the eyes of others and perhaps in Rose's own eyes as well. And yet, even as she catalogued these hurts, Rose also felt compassion welling up within her. She understood, perhaps better than Vivian herself, that her sister's behavior stemmed from fear, deep and long-standing fear of not being enough, of not being loved, of being overlooked in favor of someone who seemed to navigate life with greater ease. Vivian's cruelty had always been a defense mechanism, a way of protecting herself from a vulnerability she could not bear to acknowledge. The ceremony ended with a kiss and a joyful recessional, the newlyweds walking back up the aisle beneath a shower of rose petals while the congregation applauded. Rose clapped along with everyone else, genuinely wishing her sister happiness even as she prepared herself for the reception that would follow. The Willowbrook estate was even more impressive at its reception best, with great tents erected on the lawn and thousands of twinkle lights strung through the old oak trees. Rose found her way to table 17, which was indeed near the service entrance and populated by what appeared to be distant relatives and minor business associates, the tier of guests deemed least important to the central players of the day. She introduced herself to her tablemates with her characteristic warmth, learning their names and their connections to the bride and groom, finding the small points of common interest that could make strangers into pleasant companions for an evening. They were nice enough people, she discovered, a retired professor and his wife, a college roommate of Richard's who had fallen out of the inner circle, a cousin from California who had made the trip more out of obligation than enthusiasm. The meal was served and consumed, speeches were given and applauded, the cake was cut and distributed. Rose observed it all from her distant vantage point, watching her sister move through the crowd like a queen surveying her domain, accepting congratulations and compliments with practiced grace, never once looking toward the back tables where Rose sat. It was during the first dance, as Vivian and Richard swayed together in the center of the dance floor while photographers documented every angle, that something unexpected occurred. An elegant elderly woman approached Rose's table, her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her simple black dress exuding understated wealth and breeding. "You must be Rose," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight French accent that caught Rose's attention immediately. "You look exactly as Marguerite described you." Rose stood, her heart suddenly beating faster. "You knew my great-aunt?" The woman smiled and extended her hand. "I am Colette Beaumont. I was Marguerite's dearest friend for over 50 years. She asked me before she passed to find you on this day. She said you would need a friend and that I should tell you everything she never had the chance to say." They moved to a quiet corner of the garden, away from the music and laughter of the reception, where the evening air was soft with the scent of roses and the gentle sound of a fountain. The fountain was a simple affair, a stone basin where water bubbled up from an unseen source and spilled over the edges to collect in a shallow pool below. Surrounding it were beds of lavender and rosemary, their fragrance mixing with the roses to create an atmosphere of peace and contemplation. Colette walked with the easy grace of someone who had lived a long and satisfying life, her step steady despite her years. She led Rose to a stone bench tucked beneath an arbor of climbing roses, their blooms pale and ghostly in the fading light. From this vantage point, they could see the reception in the distance, the lights of the tent glowing warmly against the darkening sky, the figures of guests moving about like characters in a play being performed on a distant stage. "Marguerite spoke of you often in her final years," Colette began, settling onto the bench with a sigh of contentment. "She would sit in her own garden, very like this one, and tell me about the letters she received from your grandmother, about the stories of a quiet granddaughter who reminded her so much of herself." Rose sat beside her, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating with a mixture of anticipation and wonder. The evening air was cool against her skin, but not uncomfortably so, and the scent of the roses seemed to wrap around her like an embrace. "I never knew she was watching," Rose said softly. "I never knew she existed, really. My family never spoke of her." Colette nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That does not surprise me. The rupture between your grandmother and Marguerite was complete, in a way. Not dramatic, not violent, but absolute. Margaret chose to erase her sister from the family narrative rather than examine the role she had played in driving her away." And there, as the wedding celebration continued without them, Colette told Rose the full story of her great-aunt Marguerite, filling in the details that the letters had only sketched. Marguerite had indeed left Virginia as a young woman, but the reasons had been more complex than a simple desire for adventure. She had left because she could no longer bear the way her sister, Rose's grandmother Margaret, had treated her. Not with cruelty exactly, but with a dismissiveness that had worn Marguerite down over the years, a persistent pattern of overlooking and undervaluing that had finally become unbearable. In France, Marguerite had found herself. She had discovered her talents and her passions, had built a life of meaning and beauty, had learned that her worth was not dependent on her sister's recognition. She had maintained contact with Margaret through letters, had made her peace with the past, but she had never returned to Virginia, never again allowed herself to be diminished by someone who could not see her clearly. "But she watched your family from afar," Colette continued, her dark eyes warm with remembered affection. "She learned about you through your grandmother's letters, and she saw herself in you, Rose. She saw the same patterns repeating, the same dynamics playing out across generations, and she decided that she would do something to break that cycle." Rose listened with tears quietly sliding down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of recognition and release. Everything Colette was saying resonated in the deepest part of her being, validating feelings she had never quite allowed herself to fully acknowledge. "The inheritance was never about money or property," Colette said. "It was about recognition. Marguerite wanted you to know that you are seen, that you are valued, that you are extraordinary in ways your sister has never been able to perceive. She wanted to give you the foundation to step into your own light, to stop hiding in the shadows that someone else has cast over you. But why didn't she leave anything to Vivian? Rose asked. They're equally related. Colette's smile was gentle but knowing. Marguerite observed your sister carefully over the years. She saw how Vivian treats you, how she diminishes you and dismisses you and takes advantage of your kindness. Leaving Vivian an inheritance would only have reinforced the pattern, would have told her that such behavior is acceptable and even rewarded. Marguerite hoped that by leaving everything to you, she might create a moment of reflection, an opportunity for truths to be spoken and patterns to be broken. Rose sat with this for a long moment, looking out at the wedding reception still in progress on the distant lawn. She could see Vivian laughing with guests, could see Richard's arm around his new wife's waist, could see all the glittering success of her sister's carefully orchestrated day. Marguerite wanted me to give you something, Colette said, reaching into her purse and withdrawing a small velvet box. She wore these on her own wedding day, and she wanted you to have them, not to wear to someone else's celebration, but to keep, as a reminder that you are worth celebrating too. Inside the box was a pair of earrings, delicate drops of pearl and diamond that caught the fading evening light with subtle fire. They were beautiful, clearly valuable, but more than that, they were tangible evidence of a connection that had spanned decades and oceans, of a love that had found its way through time to reach exactly where it was needed. Thank you, Rose whispered, closing her hand around the box. Thank you for telling me all this. Thank you for coming all this way. Colette took Rose's hands in both of hers. Marguerite also wanted me to tell you one more thing. She said that the time will come when you will need to speak your truth, when staying silent will no longer be possible. She said you will know when that moment arrives, and she wanted you to know that she will be with you, that all the women who came before you and loved you will be with you, giving you strength. They embraced then, two women who had just met, but who were connected through bonds of love and history that transcended ordinary acquaintance. And when Colette finally released her and made her way back toward the reception, Rose sat alone in the garden for a while longer, processing everything she had learned, feeling the weight of the velvet box in her hand, sensing the shift that was occurring within her like the slow turning of a great wheel. The moment Colette had mentioned came sooner than Rose expected, arriving not dramatically but with the quiet inevitability of all true turning points. It happened near the end of the reception, as guests were beginning to make their departures and the energy of the celebration was winding down. Rose had returned to the party and was standing near the edge of the tent, preparing to say a quiet goodbye and slip away unnoticed, when Vivian suddenly appeared before her, champagne glass in hand and bridal glow still intact despite the long hours. There you are, Vivian said, and there was something in her voice that Rose recognized immediately, the particular tone her sister used when she was about to assert her dominance. I've been meaning to tell you, the dress photographed beautifully. I'm sure you'll enjoy seeing yourself credited as a local seamstress in the captions. It'll probably be good for your little business. Rose looked at her sister, at this woman she had known all her life, at this collection of insecurities and fears and genuine gifts that had somehow combined into a person who could not help but hurt those closest to her. She felt the velvet box in her purse, felt the weight of Marguerite's letters and Colette's words, felt the accumulated wisdom of generations of women who had learned to claim their own worth. Actually, Vivian, Rose said, and her voice was calm and clear, there's something I need to tell you. I've been keeping a secret, and I think it's time you knew. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly, the way they always did when she sensed a conversation moving in an unexpected direction. What kind of secret? Great Aunt Marguerite passed away earlier this year. I received a letter from her lawyers in February. She left me her entire estate, a chateau in France, artwork, antiques, and a considerable amount of money. She specifically named me as her sole heir and explained that the bequest was intentional. The color drained from Vivian's face, then rushed back in a flush of what might have been anger or shame or some complicated mixture of both. What are you talking about? We never even knew Great Aunt Marguerite. Why would she leave you anything? Why would she leave you everything? Because she saw me, Rose said simply. She watched our family from afar for decades, and she understood things that perhaps you and I have never been willing to acknowledge. She recognized in me something of herself, and she wanted me to know that I was valued. Vivian's mouth opened and closed several times, her usual quick words failing her for perhaps the first time in her adult life. Around them, the last guests were drifting away, and the staff had begun the quiet work of clearing the tables and dismantling the decorations. "This is absurd," Vivian finally managed. "You're making this up. You're trying to ruin my wedding day." "I'm not trying to ruin anything," Rose said, and there was no anger in her voice, only a calm certainty that had been building for months. "I kept this secret until now, specifically because I didn't want to overshadow your day. I'm only telling you because I realized that keeping it any longer would be dishonest, and because Marguerite wanted me to speak my truth when the moment came." "What truth? What are you talking about?" Rose reached out and gently took her sister's hand, feeling the resistance in Vivian's body, the instinctive pull away. "The truth is that you have hurt me, Vivian. For years, you have diminished me and dismissed me and treated me as if I were somehow less than you. You asked me to make your wedding dress but excluded me from your wedding party. You told me to sit in the back and dress plainly and not draw attention. You have consistently made me feel that my very existence is an embarrassment to you." Vivian tried to pull her hand away, but Rose held on, gentle but firm. "I'm not saying this to hurt you or to start a fight. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I've realized that staying silent about it has only allowed the pattern to continue. Marguerite's letters helped me understand that I don't have to accept this treatment, that my worth is not determined by your perception of me." For a long moment, the sisters stood there in the fading light, hand in hand, while the sounds of the reception's end played out around them. Rose watched emotions move across her sister's face, the denial and anger giving way gradually to something softer, something that looked almost like recognition. "I don't—" Vivian started, then stopped. She looked down at their joined hands, at the engagement ring and wedding band now glittering on her finger, at the contrast between Rose's simple gray dress and her own magnificent gown. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," Rose said. "This isn't a confrontation that needs to be resolved tonight. I just needed to speak the truth, finally, after all these years of staying silent. What we do with that truth is something we can figure out together, if you want to." Vivian was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than Rose had ever heard it, stripped of its usual polish and confidence. "I didn't mean to. I never thought of myself as—" "I know," Rose said gently. "I don't think you've been conscious of most of it. I think you've been operating out of fears and insecurities that you've never really examined. Marguerite wrote about this in her letters, about how her sister treated her without realizing what she was doing. It seems to be a pattern in our family, one that gets passed down if no one interrupts it." "A pattern?" Vivian repeated, as if testing the word. "You think I'm like grandmother?" "I think we all carry tendencies from those who raised us, and I think awareness is the first step toward choosing differently. I'm not asking you to apologize right now or to make any promises. I'm just asking you to think about what I've said, really think about it, and to consider whether there might be some truth in it." Richard appeared then, approaching his new wife with concern on his face. "Everything okay over here? The car is ready to take us to the hotel." Vivian looked at her husband, then back at Rose. Something complicated moved behind her eyes, something that might have been the first stirrings of the reflection Marguerite had hoped to inspire. "Yes, everything's fine. I was just talking with my sister." She said the word differently than she usually did, Rose noticed. Not dismissively or as an afterthought, but with a weight that suggested she was hearing it freshly, considering its meaning. "Congratulations again?" Rose said, releasing her sister's hand and stepping back. "I hope you and Richard have a wonderful life together, and when you're ready, when you've had time to think, I'd like to talk more, if you want to." Vivian nodded slowly. "The chateau in France? The inheritance? That's all real?" "It's all real. And there's a lot more I'd like to tell you about Marguerite, about what she saw in our family and why she made the choices she did, but that can wait for another day." Rose watched her sister walk away toward the waiting car, watched Richard help her gather the elaborate train of the dress Rose had made, watched them disappear into the night as husband and wife. She felt simultaneously lighter and heavier, relieved to have finally spoken and aware of the work that still lay ahead. She drove back to Hartwell that night, arriving at her cottage in the small hours of the morning when the stars were brilliant overhead and the scent of her roses filled the air. She sat for a while in her garden, listening to the night sounds and feeling the weight of the day's events settle into her bones. She had done what Marguerite had asked. She had spoken her truth. What came next was no longer solely in her hands. In the weeks that followed, Rose heard nothing from Vivian. She had not expected immediate response, had known that her sister would need time to process what had been said, but the silence still carried its own particular weight. Rose filled her days with her usual routines, her sewing and her gardening and her gentle friendships, but underneath the rhythm of ordinary life, she felt the pull of possibility, of change waiting to unfold. She began to correspond more regularly with the lawyers and with Colette, learning more about the chateau and the life that Marguerite had built in France. She looked at photographs of elegant rooms and terraced gardens, of artwork and antiques and views across the Loire Valley. And she began to imagine what it might be like to walk those halls, to tend those gardens, to inhabit even temporarily the life her great aunt had created. July arrived with its heat and its abundance, Rose's garden reaching its full summer glory. The roses bloomed in every color, their fragrance carrying on the warm evening breeze, their beauty a daily reminder of what patient cultivation could produce. Rose spent long hours among them, deadheading, spent blooms and checking for pests, feeding and watering, and simply being present with these living things she had nurtured from bare root to flowering abundance. It was on a July evening, when the fireflies were just beginning their nightly dance and the heat of the day was softening into cool twilight, that Rose heard a car turn into her driveway. She looked up from the rose bush she was tending, and there was Vivian, stepping out of a rental car and looking around at the cottage and garden with an expression Rose had never seen on her sister's face before. Rose stood and removed her gardening gloves, waiting while Vivian made her way up the path. Her sister was dressed more simply than usual, in linen pants and a cotton blouse, her face clean of makeup and her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked younger without her usual armor, more vulnerable, more like the little girl Rose remembered from so long ago. "I didn't call first," Vivian said. "I was afraid if I called, I'd talk myself out of coming." Rose nodded and gestured toward the garden bench beneath the old oak tree. "Would you like to sit?" They settled on the bench together, looking out over the garden as the last light of day painted everything in shades of gold and rose. For a long while, neither spoke, and the silence between them felt different than it had in the past, not heavy with unspoken resentments, but light with possibility. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Vivian finally said. "Since the wedding, since what you told me. I wanted to be angry with you, and for a while I was. I told Richard you had made the whole thing up, that you were jealous of me and trying to sabotage my happiness." "And now?" Rose asked gently. Vivian turned to look at her, and there were tears in her eyes that Rose could not remember ever seeing before. "Now I think you were telling the truth, not just about the inheritance, though I did verify that with the lawyers, but about the way I've treated you, about the pattern you mentioned. It took courage to come here and say that. It took more courage to tell me in the first place," Vivian said. "I've been thinking about what you said, about grandmother and great-aunt Marguerite, about patterns being passed down, and I started looking at my own memories differently, started seeing things I had never let myself see before." She paused, reaching down to pick a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "I remembered all the times Mom told stories about Aunt Marguerite, the one who ran away to France. She always made it sound like Marguerite was foolish, like she'd thrown away her family for some ridiculous romantic fantasy. But now I wonder if maybe Mom inherited the same way of seeing that grandmother had, the same tendency to dismiss and diminish." Rose waited, giving her sister the space to continue at her own pace. "And I think I inherited it from Mom. Not consciously, not intentionally, but it's there. The way I look at you and see someone to be managed rather than someone to be celebrated. The way I've always felt like I had to put you in your place, keep you from outshining me, even though—" She stopped, her voice catching. "Even though what?" Vivian let out a shaky breath. "Even though you've never tried to outshine anyone. You've just quietly been yourself, doing your work and living your life. And somehow I've always felt threatened by that. By your steadiness, your contentment, your ability to find joy in simple things. I've spent my whole life chasing validation and recognition, and you've just been. And I think I hated you for it. A little bit, or maybe I hated myself and took it out on you." Rose reached over and took her sister's hand, just as she had at the wedding, but this time Vivian did not resist. "I'm so sorry," Vivian whispered. I'm so sorry for all of it. For the wedding and the seating and the dress and asking you to stay in the background. For years and years of making you feel small. For not seeing who you are. They talked until the stars came out. Truly talked in a way they had never allowed themselves to talk before. The evening settled around them like a soft blanket. The fireflies multiplying until the garden seemed filled with floating sparks of light. The air cooling to that perfect temperature of late summer nights when everything feels possible. Rose told Vivian about the years of feeling invisible, of wondering what was wrong with her, that her own sister seemed to find her presence more burden than blessing. She spoke without accusation, simply describing her experience, letting the truth stand on its own without embellishment or judgment. She talked about the wedding and the seating and the dress, about all the small cuts that had accumulated over a lifetime until they formed a wound she had learned to carry so habitually that she had almost forgotten it was there. Vivian listened in a way she had never listened before, truly listened without preparing her defense or formulating her response. She heard things she had never allowed herself to hear, recognized patterns she had never permitted herself to see. And as the night deepened around them, she began to share her own truth, the fears and insecurities that had driven her behavior, the desperate need for validation that had never quite been satisfied no matter how much she achieved or accumulated. I think I always knew, somewhere deep down, that you were content in a way I could never be, Vivian admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And instead of learning from you, instead of letting you teach me how to find that peace, I resented you for it. I tried to take it away from you because I couldn't figure out how to find it for myself. The scent of roses wrapped around them like a blessing. They sat holding hands while the light faded and the fireflies multiplied, and the scent of roses wrapped around them like a blessing. I don't know how to be. Different, Vivian admitted. I want to, but I don't know how. That's okay, Rose said. We can figure it out together. That's what sisters do, or what sisters should do. We help each other learn and grow. I'd like that, Vivian said softly. I'd like to actually be sisters. Real sisters. Not whatever we've been pretending to be all these years. They talked until the stars came out, sharing memories and perceptions, beginning the long work of understanding each other's experiences and perspectives. Vivian asked about Marguerite and the inheritance, and Rose told her everything, showed her the letters and the photographs, let her hold the earrings that Colette had brought from France. She sounds amazing, Vivian said, looking at a photograph of Marguerite in her garden, white-haired and radiant and surrounded by flowers. I wish I had known her. She wished she had known you too, in a way. In her letters, she wrote about hoping that her bequest might create an opportunity for reflection, for the breaking of patterns. I think she would be glad to know you're here tonight. Vivian was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that Rose had been waiting for. What are you going to do with the chateau? With all of it? Rose smiled, a soft smile that held all the peace and possibility of this transformed evening. I'm not entirely sure yet. I've been thinking about visiting, spending some time there, seeing what Marguerite built. I've been wondering if maybe I could divide my time between here and there, or if maybe I could use some of the resources to help others, to support artists and craftspeople the way Marguerite did. That sounds like you, Vivian said, and there was no edge to her words, only a kind of wondering recognition. Even when you inherit a fortune, your first thought is how to share it. There's something else I've been considering, Rose said. I've been thinking about whether there might be a place in it for you. Not the money or the property, but the connection. Marguerite left me the chateau because she saw herself in me, but that doesn't mean there's no room for you. If you want, you could come with me when I visit. We could explore it together, discover together what Marguerite's life was like. Vivian's eyes widened. You would want that? After everything? We're sisters, Rose said simply, and I think we have a lot of lost time to make up for. A lot of new memories to create. Vivian stayed that night, sleeping in Rose's guest room with its soft quilts and lace curtains, its view of the moonlit garden. In the morning, Rose made breakfast, scrambled eggs and fresh bread and tea in china cups that had belonged to their grandmother, and they sat at the small kitchen table and continued the conversation they had begun the night before. They talked about their childhoods, about their parents, about the moments when each had felt closest to the other, and the moments when the distance between them had seemed insurmountable. They talked about Richard and the marriage, about Vivian's hopes and fears for this new chapter of her life. They talked about Rose's work and her garden, about the quiet contentment she had built in Hartwell and the new possibilities that Marguerite's inheritance had opened. Before Vivian left to drive back to the city, they stood together in Rose's garden, looking at the roses in full summer bloom. The morning light was gentle and golden, and the fragrance of the flowers filled the air with sweetness. "Thank you," Vivian said, "for not giving up on me, for telling me the truth even when it was hard, for giving me the chance to be different." "Thank you for coming," Rose replied, "for being brave enough to hear what I said and consider it, for wanting to change." They embraced then, truly embraced, holding each other in a way they had not done since they were children. And when Vivian finally drove away, waving through the car window, Rose felt something settle into place within her, a healing that had been decades in the making, a reconciliation that Marguerite had hoped for but could not have known would come. The summer continued, bringing with it long days of warmth and growth. Rose made plans to visit France in September, to see the chateau for the first time, and to meet with Colette and the caretaker, who had tended the property for so many years. She invited Vivian to join her, and Vivian accepted, clearing her schedule and telling Richard that this trip was something she needed to do. They flew to Paris together in early September, then rented a car and drove south into the Loire Valley, past fields of sunflowers and ancient villages, and vineyards heavy with ripening grapes. The landscape was beautiful in a way that felt both foreign and familiar, and Rose found herself thinking of Marguerite making the same journey decades ago, young and hopeful and ready for a new life. The chateau exceeded every expectation, every imagining. It stood at the end of a long drive lined with plane trees, its stone walls covered with climbing roses, and its windows glinting in the afternoon light. It was not grand in the way of the great chateau that tourists visited, but it was beautiful, elegant, and welcoming, and clearly loved by generations of caring hands. Colette was there to greet them, along with the caretaker, a gentleman named Jean-Pierre who had worked for Marguerite for 30 years. They showed Rose and Vivian through the rooms, each one filled with art and books and beautiful objects, each one telling some part of Marguerite's remarkable story. There was a studio where Marguerite had painted, its north-facing windows still letting in the perfect light. There was a library filled with books in French and English, their spines worn from years of loving use. There was a kitchen with copper pots and dried herbs, and a great wooden table where Marguerite had hosted countless dinners for artists and writers and friends. And there was a garden, terraced down the hillside in formal beds that gave way to more natural plantings, roses and lavender and Mediterranean herbs, fruit trees and vegetable patches, and secret corners with stone benches, where one could sit and look out over the valley below. Rose walked through this garden with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by its beauty and by the recognition of the soul who had created it. She could feel Marguerite here more strongly than anywhere else, could sense her great-aunt's presence in every carefully chosen plant, every artfully arranged stone, every view that had been created and preserved for the enjoyment of those who came after. Vivian walked beside her, quieter than Rose had ever known her to be, taking it all in with eyes that seemed to be seeing not just the garden, but something within herself. "She built all this," Vivian said softly. "She left everything she knew and came here and created this whole life." "She found herself here," Rose agreed. "She found the space to become who she really was." They spent a week at the chateau, exploring its rooms and gardens, reading Marguerite's journals and looking through her photograph albums, talking with Colette and Jean-Pierre about the woman who had lived here and the legacy she had left behind. Rose began to understand what she wanted to do with this inheritance, how she might honor Marguerite's memory while also building something of her own. She would keep the chateau, she decided, and she would visit regularly, perhaps spending several months each year in France. She would use some of Marguerite's resources to support young artists and craftspeople, just as her great-aunt had done. She would preserve the garden and the studio and the spirit of creativity and welcome that had always defined this place. But she would also bring Hartwell with her, would continue her work as a seamstress and her life in the quiet town where she had made her home. She did not have to choose between worlds. She could inhabit both, could weave them together in a way that honored all the parts of who she was. Vivian returned to her life in the city, but something fundamental had shifted in her. She called Rose regularly now, and the calls were different than they had been before, full of genuine curiosity and shared laughter and the slow building of a friendship that had always been possible but never before realized. She came to visit Rose in Hartwell, spending weekends in the guest room and helping in the garden, learning the names of the roses and the rhythms of small-town life. Richard noticed the change in his wife and was quietly grateful for it. He had always sensed something guarded in Vivian, some tension that she carried even in her happiest moments, and now he watched as that tension gradually released, as his wife became softer and more present and more genuinely joyful. The first anniversary of the wedding came and went, and then a second, and then a third. Rose returned to France twice each year, once in spring when the roses were beginning to bloom, and once in autumn when the harvest was underway. She formed deep friendships with Colette and Jean-Pierre, became part of the local community in the way that her great-aunt had been, contributed to the cultural life of the region while also maintaining her roots in Virginia. She and Vivian continued to grow closer, their relationship transforming year by year into something that neither had dared to hope for. They visited the chateau together sometimes, walking in Marguerite's garden and talking about the women who had come before them, about the patterns that had been broken and the new ways of being that were taking root. Rose never married, but her life was full of love, the love of friends and family and the community she had built, the love of creative work and natural beauty and quiet moments of perfect peace. She was content in a way that went beyond mere happiness, grounded in a sense of purpose and connection that had been cultivated over a lifetime of patient attention. Vivian became a mother, twice over, and Rose became the most beloved of aunts, spoiling her nieces with handmade clothes and trips to France and the kind of gentle, steady presence that she had always wished she had received from her own family. She watched her sister learn to parent with more awareness than their mother had possessed, breaking old patterns and creating new ones, raising daughters who knew they were loved unconditionally. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was fading and the roses were releasing their evening fragrance, Rose would sit in one garden or the other, Hartwell or the Loire Valley, and she would think about her great-aunt Marguerite, about the gift that had changed everything, about the courage it had taken to speak truth and the grace that had followed. She would think about the wedding day that had seemed so ordinary and had become so transformative, about the moment when she had decided to no longer stay silent, about the healing that had grown from that single act of honest speech. And she would feel, in those moments, that she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, living a life that was fully and completely her own. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and true and deeply good. The evening settles around you now like a soft blanket, the words of the story fading into the gentle rhythm of night. Perhaps you are lying in your own bed, in your own room, surrounded by your own beloved objects and memories. Perhaps the light is dim and the air is quiet, and sleep is beginning to call to you from just beyond the edges of consciousness. Think, if you like, of gardens, of roses blooming in every color, their fragrance carrying on warm evening air. Think of old stone walls and climbing vines, of kitchen tables where loved ones gather, of the slow, patient work of growing, things from seed to flower. Think of the women in this story, Rose and Vivian and Marguerite, each finding her own way to wholeness, each learning to speak truth and to hear truth, each discovering that it is never too late for healing, never too late for change. And think of yourself, of your own journey, of the patterns you carry and the choices that lie before you. You too have the capacity for courage, for honesty, for the patient cultivation of something beautiful. You too can tend the garden of your own life, pulling weeds and planting seeds, trusting in the slow unfolding of growth. The night deepens around you, your breath slows and steadies, rises and falls like gentle waves on a quiet shore. Your body grows heavy with the sweet weight of rest, sinking deeper into comfort with each passing moment. There is nothing you need to do now, nothing you need to decide or solve or understand. There is only this moment, this breath, this gradual release into peace. The stories will keep, the questions will wait, the morning will come in its own time with its own gifts. For now, let yourself drift. Let the garden imagery wash over you, roses and lavender and soft evening light. Let the characters of this story fade into dreams, their lessons absorbed, their love lingering like the fragrance of flowers. You are safe, you are held, you are exactly where you need to be. The stars are coming out now, one by one, ancient lights that have watched over countless generations of dreamers. The moon rises slowly, casting silver shadows across sleeping gardens, illuminating the peaceful faces of those who have surrendered to rest. Somewhere, in a cottage on Magnolia Lane or a chateau in the Loire Valley, roses are closing their petals for the night, conserving their beauty and their fragrance for another day. Somewhere, sisters are dreaming of reconciliation, of patterns broken and healing begun. Somewhere, the spirit of a remarkable woman watches over those she loved, her gifts still unfolding, her legacy still growing. And you, too, are part of this great tapestry of connection and love. You, too, carry within you the seeds of transformation, the capacity for courage, the possibility of peace. Whatever challenges await you, whatever truths need to be spoken, whatever gardens need to be tended, you will find the strength when the time comes. But not tonight. Tonight is for rest, for restoration, for the deep healing that comes only through surrender to sleep. Tonight, you can let go of everything except this moment, this breath, this gentle descent into dreams. Your eyelids grow heavy, your thoughts grow soft and distant, like clouds dispersing in a peaceful sky. The boundaries between waking and sleeping blur and dissolve, and you find yourself drifting, floating, releasing. Sleep now, sleep deeply and well. Let the night hold you in its gentle embrace. Let dreams come and go like summer breezes. Let your body and mind find the rest they have earned. And when morning comes, as it always does, you will wake refreshed and renewed, ready for whatever the new day brings. But that is for later. That is for tomorrow. For now, there is only this. Only rest. Only peace. Only the soft, steady rhythm of breath, rising and falling, carrying you ever deeper into the healing embrace of sleep. Good night. Sweet dreams. Rest well, knowing that you are loved, that you are worthy, that you belong to this great and beautiful world exactly as you are. The garden sleeps, the stars keep watch. And all is well, all is peaceful, all is exactly as it should be. Sleep now, sleep well, sleep.